I just love this image of the Vesica Piscis. This is going to be a talk about goddess and the crop circles and the sacred geometry and the rise of the divine feminine. When I was ordained a priestess on 10-10-10, I had a spiritual awakening at that day. I was just so ecstatic and in bliss, happy as can be, just really wondering what was going on. Is this possible that I could be this happy? And I went back to my room and my eye caught this sentence in A Course in Miracles. And it says, all separation vanishes when we share that which is holy. For holiness is power, and as we share it, it gains in strength. And I realized I had not had the experience of standing in holy power. I was being ordained with 35 other women, and we were all claiming our divine self, our divine nature. Growing up in a house full of boys, I never had this opportunity to be acknowledged and recognized for my divine nature. And I grew up Protestant, and so being in the Protestant faith, it was very devoid, very dry on the ideas of the divine feminine. So there wasn't really anywhere. And then, after you've been bullied and beaten up and treated poorly over the years, I developed low self-esteem. And so this took me all my life, basically, to hit this point of recognizing the indwelling divine nature. And everything changed. Everything changed. It was fabulous. And this is what I'm taking you on, a fabulous journey. So stick with me, ride it out to the end, and see you there. Bye. So all life is seen in sacred geometry. It comes out of the egg in the womb, but there is this mystery that also equates life. And now you'll see the goddess rising. So this is the goddess of grains, and of course crop circles are formed in fields of grain. And so this is the goddess of grain, the emitter. She's the goddess of spring, and we'll learn more about her as we go through. The purpose of crop circles, from what I've gathered and also from my own personal experience, is they're bringing a certain level of consciousness and return of the goddess to our culture, our society, our consciousness. This particular crop circle was actually made by the boyfriend of the woman who runs the goddess festival in England, and it's the triple goddess. So he did it for her. Very sweet of him to honor and acknowledge her celebrations that she does. There's also a very strong connection to Mary Magdalene, Isis. That's what drew me into crop circles. And then it's fascinating to look at the science and the research behind crop circles, because there's a lot of mystery and a lot of unanswered questions about what crop circles are. So we're going to be covering these topics as we go through and looking at the Rockefeller grant, which was a 2-year study using the latest scientific equipment to measure and determine whether crop circles were actually man-made or not. A fascinating study. So we start with consciousness, the state of being awake and aware of what is going on around you. So this is an example of being awake and aware. This is a crop circle that formulated, that outpictured the same as Fukushima in Japan. The distance between the crop circle and the river is the same distance that the Fukushima towers were in relationship to the rivers. This crop circle was also made across the river from the nuclear power plant in England. So, and there were actually 6 different crop circles that came up around and before and after this one, trying to alert us that there was going to be a problem. And unfortunately, crop circles are to be observed and they contain information, but you have to be awake and aware to be able to discern what the information is. So it's interesting looking in retrospect that there was the message right there, plain as day. So I got involved because I heard that there was a crop circle on the feast day of Mary Magdalene. And her feast day is July 22nd. And it was the identical headdress of the grain goddess Demeter. I was like, wow, this is really interesting. So there in a field of grain is the replica of this particular crop circle. And let's see the close-up. It's the swallow birds flying in formation. And of course, the swallow is the bird that's first to land on a ship that had been out to sea for long periods of time. It means you're getting closer to finding your way home. So we have been living in a very strong patriarchal culture and society. And now with the rise of the divine feminine and the return of the goddess culture, it's going to bring back home is where the heart is. Home is where love is. So it's a returning and a finding a way back to love. And you can't just have the patriarchy up here and the divine feminine down here, barely recognize a blip on the radar screen. You have to raise her up, honor her. And then as you bring the two together, they become one in the heart, this sacred union of the Heros Gamos, which is something because the indwelling nature of spirit as it appears in form on this planet is we have both the male and the female involved in this. So the swallow is often depicted in crop circles because it represents the symbol of increasing light and fertility, the birth and awakening, and lots more good news. And we need a lot of good news these days. So here's another one that's basically showing the freedom that happens when we solve blockages in the memories of families and peoples. It helps us to bring these blockages to consciousness, to understand them, and to release old paradigms and old memories. And we become more and more free inside. So this is really interesting because one time my daughter was talking to me and she was like, I don't want to carry on some of the dysfunction that you had to deal with when you were growing up as a child, and now, you know, I have a child. And so there's a very conscious and deliberate opportunity, rather than just to keep passing on the same old, to actually understand, to raise our consciousness, to remove the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, and to become more free inside so that we can evolve our society and grow. The interesting thing about the formation was also the lilies, which are represented in Easter for the resurrection. And the lilies are depicted in the crop circle, but we wonder whose resurrection they are talking about. Because remember, this is on Magdalene's feast day, and this is a crop circle about the divine feminine. So here's that triple goddess we were talking about. And this is giving us the opportunity to understand that we're rebirthing a new earth. It's supposed to be heaven on earth. And for a lot of people, it's really more like hell on earth. So how do we have this rebirth? How do we move into this process where we are living a life based on love, compassion, and the fulfillment of our dreams. The goddess symbols are associated with the feminine are often crop circles. So you'll see the star, the pinnacle. It helps people to find their center and to find silence. So we just take a moment in this inner silence of all the activity and tap into our full potential. This has a very grounding effect. To look within, to look inward, instead of always doing, looking outward. So the symbols are helping to raise our consciousness. The moon is also a symbol that is shown in crop circles a lot. And the Native Americans had a prophecy that the winter solstice of 12/21/12, when the moon has been seen both on earth and in the heavens. So how could the moon be seen on earth? Well, here's an example of the moon on earth. This is showing the 13 moon cycles. So she is again on earth, the crescent moon, with a robe that's 4,000 feet. So it's quite expansive and extensive. And here you see the sun and the moon, again, inner plane, as above, so below, showing this that we are on sacred ground, and integrates the linear time and the awareness of the Earth's future with today's reality. Help the Earth to integrate the vibration of love. So you have the Vesica Pisces, the womb, and the circle of the feminine, and the crescent moon, which is the feminine, helps us to integrate the vibration of love. So the crop circles connections with Magdalene and Isis. How do crop circles show up for Magdalene and Isis? Well, we'll see crop circles with Egyptian ideas represented by Isis, the mother of creation. The feast day of Mary Magdalene is July 22nd and is tied to Isis by her star Sirius, which rises at this time to mark the beginning of the Egyptian calendar when the Niles flood. So when they connect the star Sirius, which has a direct connection to the Queen's Chamber, and then Orion and his belt connects to the King's Chamber, you'll see that this pyramid is so precise, it's unbelievable. I was at the pyramids, I was in the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber meditating. It's a very powerful, energetic vortex. And there'll be other Egyptian symbols there as well. So this was another interesting crop circle that showed up on July 22nd. And this is basically the 7 chakra centers, fully open, fully expanded, fully illuminated. And that is what the story of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene explains about her expansion into her enlightenment. In the Bible, it says that when Jesus was risen the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 demons. Well, they would like you to believe that they're talking about Halloween demons, that she was ill and she was mentally ill and physically ill and she had all these demonic possessions, and so Jesus had to clean her because she was a sinner. But in fact, some of the surviving pieces of fragments that we've gotten, both the Bible and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, were written in what is called ancient Greek. And the word is diamon, which is a word for spirit or divine power. And the Greek term does not have any connotations at the ancient Greek language of evil or maleficent. In fact, it literally means good-spiritedness. It is a term for happiness. The term later acquired its now current evil connotation when it was translated, and we got the word demon from that. This word, daemon, the concept of daemons that pass into the Christian culture, should be duly noted that the term referred only to a spiritual force, not a malevolent supernatural being. So it's just talking about the power of spirit, or the power of God that exists in us is all powerful and all knowing. There is a verb translation of it, and when you look at the Greek word for daemon in its verb form, it means to divide and distribute. So that was also used when they had the expression of Jesus casts out, distributes 7 demons. So what is he distributing? Remember, it's rooted to the idea of good-spirited and happiness. So in other words, she is there standing before her master, her beloved. And she is opening. I mean, you were standing before Jesus, and he had achieved the level of mastery that he had achieved by the time you met him. You might be opening some and releasing some daemon, some good-spiritedness in you, because his demonstration of his full-on presence of love was what he was so powerfully known for. And remember, the first miracle he did was turning water into wine at the wedding of celebration at Canaan, which is now thought to have been his wedding to Magdalene. So it's interesting that she was possessed, did you? Or do you think she might have been divinely inspired into a state of good-spiritedness and happiness in his presence? I think so. You see, the pearls are before her, and they say, you don't throw pearls before swine. But she's not swine. She's basically talking about her fully illuminated, enlightened state of consciousness, that she became enlightened in his presence. And that was because she did the listening when he was teaching in the famous Martha and Mary story. You know, Mary was doing the right thing. She was listening very intently and understanding what he was teaching. In Plato's Symposium, there's a priestess, Diotima, teaches Socrates that love is not a deity, but rather a great daemon. She goes on to explain that everything demonic is between divine and mortal. And she describes the daemons as the interpreting and transporting human things to the God and divine things to men. So here we are, back at square one. Many of us know and have heard this teaching, that our awakening is to discover the inner divine nature of our true self, and to allow us to accept our true divine nature. And so the feminine much more closely embodies this. And so she is teaching. I remember taking my freshman year in college and having to read Socrates and study this, but this was not emphasized, believe me. And it's what should have been emphasized. We would have had a different culture. The Christians' use of demon in the strict malignant sense as a general belief in spirits is not expressed until the 5th century. They began to change it, where they started to show it as spirits, as more demonic spirits, not being supernatural powers and things like this, that Jesus came. So you know, here's what we learned from the crop circles. She was fully open and illuminated. Well, now we have an awakening regarding what was thought to be the face of John, but actually is strikingly familiar to the face of Magdalene. This is Da Vinci's sketch of Magdalene, and there's his picture of her. But what's interesting is the position of Peter's hand. So Peter's hand cuts off her throat and attempts to silence her voice. And the other interesting thing is on the wall, in the corner, is the Grail cup. And then you'll see the Isis knot down in the lower corner on the right because of Magdalene's connection with Isis. They call it the knot of Isis. She's the mother of all creation. So that's what happened to me when I was ordained on 10-10-10. I went into this pure state of bliss. I connected with my divine nature. And when I went back to my room, I saw this sentence that all separation vanishes as holiness is shared. The holiness is power, and by sharing it, it gains in strength. And unfortunately, we live in an egoic world where the ego will not have any of this holiness. So it really behooves us to honor and accept our divine nature, to stand in our power, and then we'll see a world living in love. We'll see an experience of heaven on earth. We'll see positive signs along the way. Like this is the stamp for heaven on earth. The angelic presence, the crescent moon, the circle of oneness, if we choose. There's also the Mayan headdress, which is telling us that times are changing, because the Mayan calendar was coming to an end. And of course, people thought this was the end of an era, but it actually wasn't. We were just moving into alignment with the dawn of a new era, and a new cycle was beginning. So what happened and what shifted? That started earlier in the year when Venus eclipsed the sun. So at the pyramids in Mexico, the snake is coiled. She waits ready, coiled in front of the eclipse of the sun. And of course, there was a crop circle on August 14th of 2012, showing that her eyes are open and she's awakening from this coiled state, which seemed like she was asleep. So when she eclipsed in front of the sun, was also outlined and demonstrated and showed in the crop circles that appeared. And you saw this happening over and over throughout that summer. Crop circles that were telling the importance of this transit of Venus phenomena, when the planets would cross between Earth and the sun and have this lineup. And this is a rare appearance of Venus. It was an amazing metaphor. Because there's the big sun, which looks like the masculine, and there's the little tiny dot. But against the backdrop of the sun, she becomes obvious. So there she is. And as she moves across, she starts to form what is called a cathar symbol. And the cathars were a very important part. This is a picture of the monastery at the top of the mountain in Montségur in the south of France. That was a stronghold for the Cathars. And the Cathars refused to go along with the Pope. And they were bound and determined that women were priestesses and they were equal in spirit. They could be married to the priest, and if the priest died, the priestess would continue on with the work of community. And there was this respect, just as Jesus respected Mary Magdalene, and they were each other's beloved, and they honored and worshiped that sacred heros gamos union. So the symbol for the Cathars is the maypole. When you have the maypole, if you're looking from heaven down on the maypole, you'd see just the top of the pole, which goes to earth. So it's connecting heaven and earth in oneness. So because the Cathars honored women as priestesses, the Catholic Church at the time was not interested in upholding this honor, and so they labeled the Cathars heretics. And there is different reports, but it was like there was like 222 people that were burned, and it was the Divine Feminine was almost destroyed, and we almost lost the priestess because Pope Gregory was also had an instrumental hand at this time because he labeled Mary Magdalene the prostitute of the woman at the well, even though the Catholic Church later in 1969 issued a public proclamation saying this was not true. He had made an error. There's no evidence that Magdalene was a prostitute. So the other story is that 4 people escaped off the backside of the mountain when the Catholics overtook during the Crusades and killed and massacred all of these remaining Cathars. And there's different versions of this, of who they were, but I remember Kathleen McGowan talking about it, and I was clicking on her website page, looking at different links to the Cathars, and I found a website that was called the Magdalene House, and they had the descendants of the Cathars who were murdered, these 222 Cathars, names, their family names, and there was my family name. And my brother, who is also different mothers, same mother, different father, his father's name was there as well. So by the time we decided to climb up to the top, it was quite a ways to get up there. And as we got up there closer and closer, it became foggier and foggier and foggier. And we decided to pay our respects. So we created a little altar and had the white and the purple candles symbolically representing the Cathars' union, their sacred union. And we took a picture, and lo and behold, there was one orb. And it was kind of curious, one perfectly round, beautiful orb. Remember, sometimes you'll see orbs in pictures because of, like this was one of the Luxor temple in Egypt, and they told us to bring our cameras because this temple was full of orbs. And that's normally how you see orbs in pictures, or you'll see light coming through a window and then there's all these millions of orbs. So to just have this one orb by itself was a ball of light, really quite extraordinary. And then I came across this picture in the book Searching for Mary Magdalene, and there was this Grail cup with an orb in it. So that was interesting. And then there, of course, there was a crop circle. Now, this was one of the crop circles where a group of researchers who were watching with night vision goggles, and they were observing two fields at the top of this mountain. And so they left to go look at the other field, and just for the hour and a half that they went back to look at the other field, when they came back to this field, 300 feet, that's like a football field size. And here it is, fully formed. Just in the hour and a half, they stopped to go check the other field. So this is quite extraordinary, that how could this be done by any human so quickly? You can see how tiny the people are in relationship to the fields. Quite impressive. And then when that weekend that I was getting ordained, a friend was taking a picture of me. I had the cistern, and I was getting ready to shake it, and just in a split second, 1, 2, 3, she was saying, pick it up, set, and go. And I shook it, and all of a sudden, all these orbs showed up in the picture. The most interesting of which is this down at the lower bottom corner of the picture is this huge red orb. Very clear red color. When he says that's the red Tara. So that's pretty amazing that there was this beautiful, lovely, and there is light coming in from a window way up there, but the fact that there are so many, look at the smile on my face, and the fact that there was this huge red one, it was definitely above and beyond your normal, ordinary orbs picture. So this is, the temple of Isis was also full of orbs. So the day before the world was supposed to end, on 12/21, a friend of mine and I went down to the Yucatan, and we met with this female shaman who was doing a sacred flower mandala ceremony. And she got up and spoke to the audience beforehand, and she says, I want to address the men. She said, because people think that tomorrow is the end of the world, and tomorrow is not the end of the world. She said, but it is an end of an era, and it is now the rise of the divine feminine. So that's what was the shift that she saw, that all of these crop circles, symbols that were related to the divine feminine, were also rising to bring forth this message that there is a now return to the goddess. So when I got home, I was really curious, because this was in December, right? What was the first crop circle of 2012? And I went back and found it, and it was a flower of life symbol. But it was interesting because it was in a field of yellowing flowers in what is called rapeseed oil. Anyway, the message from the flower of life, because the flower of life within it contains the Vesica Pisces. And it's the beginning of the universe. It's the beginning of the development of the sacred geometry of life. And so this was very significant because it was kind of like an alert. The yellow is a warning or an alert. Pay attention. And the flower of life symbolizes that the very center of the flower of life is the center of love. So the question is whether we're going to move into the center of love. This ancient flower of life is what is considered to be an interdimensional tool. It is a portal, a stargate, a window into what some call the inner space planes. And so here's a beautifully made, huge flower of life. Now, each one of these rows is about 75 to 100 feet wide. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 8. So this is a massive, massive flower of life symbol. And here's one that was made in the dead of night by humans. So you can see the human frailties with the crop circle. The original flower of life is also found at Hathor's temple in Abydos, which is a very high, very high goddess center. Lots of acknowledgments down in this area to divine feminine symbols. And this particular flower of life symbol, they still to this day do not know how. It looks like it was lasered into this stone. And so it seems like, wow, how could they have etched this? They couldn't chisel it, such perfection. There's definitely something that's more than what we know going on. Now, the vesicle Pisces also represents and holds and carries the symbol of the cross and the circle, the womb of the universe. It also holds the summer and winter solstice points as the earth makes its way around the sun. It's a symbol that brings one from duality to oneness. There's a soft energy unifying and removing the feelings of separation. This is the womb of the universe. Out of the mother, we come. And that's such an important connection to love. The year ended with the Vesica Pisces. And when you do the sacred geometry on the center of the Vesica Pisces, you'll find that the sacred geometry represents the 153 fishes that are caught in the net. The net being the community, the church of people. But the sacred geometry of 153, which means in Greek, the Magdalene. So this is a really important factor as well, because we're talking about, remember, we went from the beginning of the year with the earth being stamped with the flower of life, and then at the end of the year, because Australia's summer is our winter, there it is stamped again, but it's stamped in the sacred geometry of Vesica Pisces, which the Heros Gammas, the Greek sacred geometry mathematically means 153, which then correlates to the Greek alphabet, where each letter has a certain value, and when you put the value to it, it gives you what the name is, which is the Magdalene. So you've got your Cathar symbol, where priestess and priests are equal, with the flower of life, which is that saying that we're moving into a consciousness of oneness.